Well, I had a, so here we are having we time.
Ah, there we go. All right, now I'm going to turn my phone off. How about that? Has it?
Okay.
All right, let me turn this off. Okay.
So, yeah, it's good to say things to people that they don't expect.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's like one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
It's a good time, for sure.
I don't know what people, like, you don't know what people expect though, right? But I have a situation that I want to talk about, and I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay, cool.
This is Audrey. We're having we time. Do you want to scoot a little closer so we're a little, so you can't see my fat balls?
Oh, yeah. I'm ready.
So it's a body thing. So I did a little story on Instagram. Part of my story was putting a dowel. So one of our friends who you know has had a baby, and I don't know, but I would have to work with her or look, but what's that called, that where the
I'd have to look it up. I don't remember.
So the rectus abdominis splits, but it splits more than normal.
Yeah, she said it's like 3 inches or something like that.
Yeah, so it's a lot. And so I'm wondering like how to help draw those muscles back together.
Okay.
So my first thought was to do this dowel work that Iyengar used to do. So, you strap a dowel onto your back, and you can just stay in a mountain pose, but you can also do like postures to keep the spine straight.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, so it just gives you good feedback. You don't have to keep your spine that straight, but it gives you feedback. And I think what it would do for her is to help activate the abdominal muscles, but in a really gentle way. Because you do kind of get that sense of like, I have to, look, what do I have to do muscularly to hold that posture? So a friend of mine said, texted me that evening and was like, I was laughing so hard, I was looking at that, and a guy friend, he was like, I was laughing, and I was like, I had this, he said, I was imagining myself strapping you up in that. And
on the dowel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know what the expected response was, but my response was, well, why don't you strap yourself up like that? And,
So that was your first? Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I don't know what kind of response that is seeking.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. But so what made you respond in that way? Like, what was it? Like, how did you take it? Like, your first...
The way I took it was, you're laughing at this practice and sexualizing it. That's what I was assuming.
Did you?
Or you're laughing. Yeah, but I didn't say that. Which is, and just like, as we're like, what's going on, and like with Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford and just Me Too and stuff like that, I wonder, like, do we need to be that direct? Like, should I have been that direct? Like, are you sexualizing it? Or do I need to just say, like, strap yourself, not feed into the joke?
Interesting.
By just saying, like, and then I said, or you could come schedule a session with me and I'll strap you up because I do this for a living, to teach people how to have good posture and how to practice yoga. So I didn't address it directly to question, are you sexualizing this? I just assumed.
Well, I mean, for me, in any situation, like, what I've learned about myself is, regardless of, first of all, I'm not very, like, sensitive to, like, being sexualized, because I don't know, I just don't really have an issue with it, because I don't really care. I'm like, whatever, I'm not sensitive about it. I don't feel, I'm like, it would take a lot to make me uncomfortable in that way. Like, usually people are very respectful and whatever, so I don't have a lot of sensitivity to that anyways. But what I have found is that regardless of what the situation is, however someone is like saying something to me, whatever my first inclination is like learning to trust that. Whatever it is, whatever my first inclination is, like, and following through with that communication and recognizing that that is coming from a place. It's that idea of like learning to trust yourself, you know, like, because as we navigate the, you know, like social and communication expectations of our culture and like how we've been trained to do what we do and play the roles that we play, as we become more connected with our authentic way of being in the world, we may be surprised, or maybe not surprised, but challenged by what our first response actually is. And it's trusting that. It's whatever that is, it's trusting it and not going back and second guessing and saying, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, da-da-da-da-da. Like whatever, you know.
We should give that person benefit of the doubt, or I just should. Yeah,
it's just like, that's how I responded.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Right.
Like, that's how I responded.
And you can call me on that.
Sure.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
But like, it's best for me to just follow my initial intuitive response. And then if I get called on that, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. That's what I've learned over the years. And granted, there have been times when I have been called on things and it's made me uncomfortable, and I've had to dig deeper into why that might be my first response, which have all been good experiences, you know, but by and large, I've learned, like, what the lesson for me has been is to trust myself. Just trust myself, because we each have our unique way of showing up in the world, and we have our unique way of communicating and, like, moving information.
Yeah.
And so, in my way of thinking, you know, every you know, aspect of creation is an expression of creation, of spirit, of God, of whatever you want to call it. And so however a person is communicating to me, that is divine in its own right. If I can honor that in myself, I can honor it in another, and then not take it personally, but still come from a place of being authentic to who I am when I'm communicating. But that in and of itself, I feel like is a challenging practice, because there's all those filters of like self-doubt, lack of it's really like value, self-worth, and self-doubt that are some of the like, that try to come in the beginning and like deconstruct what my first response might be, if that makes sense.
It does.
And sometimes it's so rote, it's such a pattern of communicating from those places of not identifying with my empowered, you know, position, that I have to then go back and really like look deeper into if my first response really was something that wasn't authentic to who I am. What is that about? And it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. That has everything to do with me.
Right.
Although it can be extraordinarily triggering.
Or for me, acting on the first response.
Right.
Like my big interest in my own self, my own practice, and then for other people is how do we feel that you know, like, oh, this intuitively, like, but we don't act in line with that.
Right. There's like
what
fear,
holds us back? Like, what is the fear? And sometimes we don't even know.
Yeah.
And like we talked about last week, so I like went through that deep dive to figure out my own, you know, whatever stories and reasons and stuff like that. But I think they're very common, you know, for people in general, for women, but in men too. Yeah. You know, why don't we? How were we questioned, or how were we hushed, or how were we, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it has to do with like
changing that behavior.
So much of it is around empowerment, and I think that it is probably more common now with men, especially with like, as you know, the subject of like there being a lot more openness and receptivity to people as they explore their gender identification. So when we start getting into things like that, and we get into, I can only imagine, I have no frame of reference for what it would be like to truly work to communicate authentically when you're dealing with something like that, you know. So there's all these different.
Well, I think it's challenging, and I have a friend who who is a transgender person, and as that person was transitioning from female to male, the issues that rose up, you know, with his partner, because they started in a lesbian relationship, and then he went through that process that she was very supportive of, but then once he had gone through that process, like, that's an amazing process, and like, he began to feel so empowered, and it really changed the dynamic of their relationship. And so they were really kind of like, you know, they're working through those weeds, and I think it's great that people are doing that, and being authentic in that way, and like, they have the opportunity medically and like with drugs and stuff to like change outwardly to match what they feel inside.
Exactly.
But then there's all that cultural stuff too that goes along with like then adapting and figuring that out.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, this is a cool subject because it's definitely something that I think about, because I've definitely had people commentate on my communication style.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I was talking to somebody last night because they would say it's more masculine, right? Would they? Or what have they said? Like, somebody said to me, like, you are very masculine. Like, you look feminine on the outside, but you have a very masculine energy. And I was like,
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure that there have been maybe some, I don't know. I think really people who are like, some people who are super, super close to me on occasion have made some like passing jokes, but I never, like, it doesn't, I'm like, whatever. Mainly what I've had are, I remember one particular situation when, I don't know, a few years ago, when someone told me that I was an aggressive communicator, and I said, I don't think I'm an aggressive communicator, I just don't think you're used to people being straightforward with you. I was like,
because how many people are straightforward with each other, with themselves?
right.
Which comes to like satya, right? Or the practice of yoga and what arises for us. It's like, I think over time, maybe it breaks down this fear and that illusion of like that separateness, or like, I can't be this way because of this. Like, well, I just have to be.
Yeah, you just have to be you.
Right, but it's an anti-conditioning. It's a reconditioning.
Yes. Or I like to think of it, and this is something that has come from other influences, but this idea of like rewilding. It's like a domestication, like like a unwinding the domestication of our conditioning, and just giving ourselves permission to, and there's a balancing in that. I will say that, like, I think that at different times, like probably earlier, several years ago, perhaps the way that I communicated what maybe was more aggressive based on where I was at that time. There was probably an imbalance because I was finding my way and making up for a lack of that I perceived, right? And what I've noticed is over the years, based on different cycles and different seasons in my life, and like what I'm receiving as like my lessons in that time, is there has been a gentleness that has come. But with that gentleness, there hasn't been a lack of strength. It's learning for me, and this is, again, not for anyone else, and everyone's, process with that is their own, but like finding that balance of like being assertive, present, balanced, grounded, and strong and stable, like, but not immovable. Like, there's flexibility there, there's openness, there's receptivity to hear other ways of other perspectives, other ways of thinking about things, a place to acknowledge when I'm way off base, and that comes to my attention, and how to negotiate that. And so it is very like strong, stable, grounded, present, also very receptive, gentle, and recognizing and like perceiving what's intuitively recognizing what's needed in the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think all of that like melded together with, you know, being authentic, that at least for me, that is a part of me being authentic, because it is important to me to be able to be received.
Right.
I want to be received. I want there to be rapport. That's extremely important to me. That's a value that I have, and that people feel safe in my presence, but also know that I'm going to be forthcoming.
Yeah.
Which of course I struggle with, like any human being, you know, like I have that goal, but there are still times when I see myself, you know,
yeah, well,
hiding in the shadows.
Yeah, but there may be value in that. Like maybe that's what needs to happen at that time. You know, I think that's where discrimination comes in. But yeah, like for me, like I was so sensitive for a long time. You know, it's like I didn't want to hear criticism because I was critical enough, and I didn't want to have that dialogue, and I didn't want anybody to call me out, or like I felt so, you know, I was doing that, perpetuating that in myself, like so enough where, you know, and so yeah, and so but that's what it takes, right? Is community. Like and I just wrote on this today on Facebook. You know, it's like we have to hold each other accountable. Like that's how we grow. That's how we actually evolve, you know, and as a society. And I was thinking like within the yoga community, just because I'm a yoga nerd, if you didn't know.
Just for the record, so
for the record,
stated.
like
yeah,
I really love it.
that's awesome.
But and you know, because it's about life, you know, I think yoga is just, it's about life and fully being like you're saying, like authentic and present in each moment, and knowing how to adapt within the moment so that you're not harming yourself or anybody else, you know, like.
How do you facilitate? That's what I always come back to.
Right.
How to facilitate that moment.
Yeah.
What are the most important, what is needed? And again, that comes from like, you know, what part of my journey is here, and we all have those different unique roles to play. But I do think that's a powerful place. Yeah,
facilitating the process. I've been listening to this podcast, so great, Jay Brown, Yoga Talks, and and he was talking about his teaching, and I was like, oh my God, thank you, you know, because he was saying like he doesn't teach like a posture, but like how, but the process of the posture, like how somebody can embody their process of, you know, it within that practice.
Nice.
Right, and I feel like that's what it's about, and that's maybe what you're saying as far as facilitating the process, as opposed to just saying like do this or this is the shape, make it. You know, like for a beginner, that's what you do, or like kids, like can you make the shape? I mean,
right.
That's how you know, it's fun, and then you just. But as far as a more developed practice, it does require from a teacher, I think, facilitation of how are you in this process.
I think that it's definitely a how are you. I think, at least for me, it's a really like powerful about like, I think as humans in our day and age, we are not taught foundationally to trust ourselves. We're taught to give our power to others who know better for us than we know for ourselves. So when I'm teaching,
most of the time men, just saying, not always. Male.
I don't have a really strong like identification with it being male. I've experienced both. I don't, you know, like, so for me, it's just depends on the individual and their temperament and how they process information. And what has been really super important for me in like, you know, facilitating yoga classes is creating the space for people to learn to trust themselves, to find where it is that we're going within that, or not where, but where they are going within that pose. Like, here are the parameters to remain safe. As long as you're adhering to that, how you discover that for yourself is a unique process unto you and is not for me to dictate. You know better than any person what's going on within your own body. How do you become receptive to those subtle communications or not so subtle communications, and then become obedient to them so that you can learn to trust that intuitive information that is constantly coming, but that we've been taught to like kind of just brush it off, like I'm gonna, put my energy in someone else and what they're telling me to do. Yeah, that's a big one, and it's a lesson that I continually learn because I, in many places in my life, have relinquished my personal power and trusting my own process in exchange, or wanting in exchange approval from someone else.
Totally.
And that's not the other person's fault.
I mean, I've heard other people talk about that. I've never done that, but just kidding.
I was like, crickets, I'm over here. I was like, okay, that's awesome. Like, that's incredible. I like how I totally went down the rabbit hole with you on that one.
Yeah.
But that's a big one, and I've been really super
But then
grateful.
my reaction to that, when I've done that, is then to be mad.
Well, of course.
Right. Yeah. It's like, that's bullshit. But it's like, no, that's because I did that. I gave that power away.
Right.
I idealized. Yeah.
It's that whole victim thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, now I'm, man, that story, woo, boy, is there so much justification. I had a lot of fun a couple of years ago really digging into that word, justification, and recognizing how loaded, when I really started to meditate on what justification means and how we are conditioned to justify whatever it is. And I don't care if it's from like just generally feeling not great about, whatever emotional nonsense we're experiencing, or behaving poorly and like utilizing even spiritual stuff to justify like poor behavior, straight up poor
totally.
behavior. I have done it a million times. I'm like, ooh, but I had a dream that, it's like, holy shit, no, what you're doing is totally nonsense. You have justified it, and there's gonna come a time when that is gonna be, the balancing is gonna come, I promise.
Totally. It's so
Ooh,
true.
it's rough.
I remember when I was doing that, it was, a long time ago, at least 3 days, no, but like years ago, like there was a period where I got really devoted to yoga practice, and then I was like using like sutras and like just stuff like to justify, and it was almost like I knew I was doing that. You're doing it, but you do it anyway. You know what I mean? Like, me.
Totally, absolutely. Well, but that's part
But
of
I also couldn't
purification.
stop. Yeah, it was like a process. It's it's the process of like figuring out what's real. Yeah.
What is real, right? Okay. Yeah, exactly. And it's okay. Like that's the whole thing, like that whole just being okay, like just being present to the process and being gentle and unconditionally loving with yourself as you watch yourself progress through these different cycles and phases, and and in retrospect, boy,
And just know,
Yeah.
I mean, there are cause and effect. There are consequences to how you act.
sounds so simple, right?
It is simple.
Right, totally, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's all good. That's all part of the process, I suppose. Oh, it's funny though. But yeah, that's a fun. It's a good
one.
Yeah, it is a good one for sure.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to call this we time or jai time, because I do jai time too, which is a practice. But any victories this week?
Victories.
Yeah.
Hell yes, there's been some freaking victories. Oh my God. So I've been in a big process of self-transformation. This year, my goal was to completely upgrade my entire life. It's just what needed to happen. Like I had spent too much time being okay in this very like mediocre, like just getting by, it's just good enough, but just too much energy and like suffering and struggling with things that I could very easily, if like found some courage, could and can adjust, like if I were to step into my own personal power, but easily sort of like giving that away. So I started doing that at the beginning of the year, and so this week, yesterday, I found my own place, and it's right behind here. So I'm moving into my own little space, and that's a really big deal for me. Like there was a big, beautiful process that has been involved with that I'm really grateful for, and for all the support that I've had from everyone in my life for that. And so that feels like a huge victory for me. It's a sort of like a punctuation of some kind, but a continuation, So what about you?
One of my most recent victories is just a boundary thing. Yeah, where I had a client who was, without going into all the details, but was being unreasonable, and I felt like I handled the situation in a way that said, like, you're being unreasonable, and I will give this, but I'm not going to give that because that's unreasonable. And when there was continued pushback, like, I just held my ground and wasn't overly emotional. My big victories have to do with not being overly emotional, because I'm an extremely emotional person, and I can be very,
That's awesome. That's a big deal.
So
save a lot of energy doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, congratulations.
So that's one. Yeah, I got my car cleaned out.
Sweet. There you go.
That's a good one. I made it here. We're doing it. That's a victory. Check.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's all these small things that we put together that weave the, experience of our life. So all of those things are important.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and I'm just like reaching out, in ways that I didn't before, not over analyzing everything.
Nice.
Still a lot, but
it's a process.
It's a process, yeah.
Well, I'm grateful that you asked me to be a part of this. It was very fun.
Yeah.
It's a cool conversation. I didn't know what to expect really, so this was perfect. It was
Yeah.
and now we're doing it.
Whatever.
I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it just started.
I'm like, oh, I'm being recorded. Hi. How you doing, everybody?
I'm just finishing my text message.
Yeah, don't mind me as I talk shit to my friend on my phone. This is totally fine.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's good.
Cool.
Okay, namaste.
Namaste.